All right, good evening, folks. Thanks for your patience. We've got a quorum, so I'm going to kick off today's meeting of the Climate and Environmental Justice Commission. So I'll call this meeting to order. We'll start rather than doing a roll call. I'll note that we are just missing one commissioner today, that's Sarah Moore. Otherwise, all commissioners are in attendance. Next item then would be the approval of today's agenda. Would anyone like to move to approve today's agenda or issue or provide any comments on order of the agenda items?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. And that's unanimous. Great. We'll then move to brief announcements. Today, let's start with our council member. Councilmember Neville, do you have any brief announcements you'd like to share?
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. I don't have any updates, but welcome, and I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you. And how about for staff? Any brief announcements you'd like to share?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple. So I'll save the introduction for last. So just a reminder, October 8th meeting for select commissions for the Measure JRD discussion. So put that, you should have an email to that effect already. I'm assuming another one would go out as a reminder. And then no special meeting next week. I know we authorized one in the last meeting. The item for that discussion is actually before you tonight because we had to shift what was planned for tonight to a different month. So we were able to accommodate that. So no special meeting next week. And that's primarily due to the timing of the Willow Grove development, which was supposed to be tonight. There's some changes to when that's coming before commissions, and we'll get that scheduled to you once we're more aware of when that happens. And then lastly, the new Climate Action and Resiliency Program Manager has started, Sam Blakelock, which is sitting behind me here. He will ultimately end up being the liaison for this commission here in a few months. So he's here to just keep an eye on everything tonight, see how it's going. And then probably starting next month, or certainly by the month after, he'll be up here participating, and ultimately will be your main liaison with me as a secondary backup, if you will. So that's all.
Thank you, Stan, and welcome. Looking forward to working together. Hopefully you don't see too much chaos in the meeting today and you get scared off and we'll never see you again. But I don't think that'll happen. So keeping on that trend, let's start with commissioners. Any brief announcements? This could be pretty general in nature, but anything related to the Climate and Environmental Justice Commission that you've seen outside or would like to discuss at the start of this meeting. Let me start off at the far end. Jesse, do you have any brief announcements for us?
No, nothing for me, thanks.
Thank you. Jim?
No.
Luana?
No.
Yeah.
Nothing for me.
All right, and nothing from me either, so just moving along swimmingly here. We'll then go to public comment. This is the time for any members of the public who would like to comment on something that's not on the agenda. Feel free to approach the dais. We'll also have opportunities to comment on each of the items later in the meeting as well. But seeing none, I'll close this opportunity for public comment, and that just takes us right to the consent calendar here. So we have the commission minutes from August 25th of this year. It's actually been a while since we've done a consent calendar item, so let me just find my handy little notes there. So for these items, if commissioners want to propose any minor changes to the minutes, for instance, they can do so. If the minutes didn't quite capture a conversation, or if you have a different memory, you can propose those at this point. If something is really off and it needs a little bit of work, you can ask for that item to be pulled or say that you disagree with it. Otherwise, our action would be to approve the minutes as they are written, as they are the record of our previous meeting. So that would take a motion from one of the commissioners. So I'll pause for a moment, just ask if anyone has any comments or concerns, changes they'd like to make to the minutes from that August 25th meeting.
I was not able to attend that meeting, so I'll recuse from the vote to approve the minutes, because I was not there.
Sure. Thank you. I I guess with that then, hearing no dissent then, I'll move to approve the minutes for August 25th. Would anyone like
I
a second?
second.
Thank you. And all those in favor, can raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those opposed? And opposed, and Jordan abstains. All right, thanks, folks. Sorry for shaking off the cobwebs on that particular item. That brings us to our regular item, which is the municipal code amendment, and I'll let our city staff take that one away.
All right. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. My name is Thomas McNairn. I'm an Associate Planner within the Department of Community Development. And the item before you tonight is a sliver of the 2025 Omnibus Zoning Ordinance Amendments. This is but just a little bit of what we're taking to the City Council, ideally by the end of the year. But one topic in particular is some proposed changes to Chapter 37 to reflect the changes that we're making to parking lot shading standards in Chapter 40. So we are seeking feedback on the proposed changes to both 37 and the specific portion of Chapter 40 relating to parking lot shading standards. So why is it called an omnibus ordinance? Why are you hearing zoning ordinance amendments tonight? Chapter 40 is the zoning ordinance within the Davis Municipal Code. Every once in a while, it's good practice to update the zoning ordinance as state law changes, direction from council changes. Some things just get a little bit aged. And so it's good practice to bring forward amendments, to update the code, and make it more consistent. Some of the topics that we're bringing forward to the council relate to just different definitions, parking standards, consistency with the housing element, shade requirements, administrative approvals, just making some processes more efficient. But the big bulk of what's changing in Chapter 40 is due to Assembly Bill 2097. This bill, as amended through 2022, precludes a local government from requiring parking standards within a half a mile of high-quality public transit. The City of Davis has a very robust public transit system, and so has high-quality, public transit stops all over the city, essentially rendering parking requirements throughout the city. As a result, the City Council directed staff to remove parking requirements from Chapter 40 almost entirely, and so that's what we're bringing forward to the Council. So staff, as a result of that, saw an opportunity to update the code a little bit and bring forward some climate-smart updates to Chapter 40, specifically Chapter 40.25, where our parking standards live. Chapter 40, these are the changes that we are proposing that are pertinent to the purview of this commission. Basically, the changes to parking lot standards fall into three different options for a property owner or developer. Option one is status quo, moving forward and maintaining the requirement of 50% canopy shading over a parking area within 15 years of the planting of the tree or within the development or the project. Option two is around development standards. So a developer or property owner can choose to follow certain guidelines that are very consistent with different requirements of municipalities around the Sacramento area, helps just with consistency for the developer. And then option three, which I'm assuming will be the basis of our conversation tonight, is the option for solar energy structures covering 50% of parking spaces. This, why are we allowing three different choices for property owners and developers? Basically, it falls back to flexibility. Staff believe that flexibility will allow for better conformance for many things throughout the code, especially for the climate action and adaptation plan goals and visions. Namely, localized renewable energy generation and storage, and then also to increase albedo and create some cooler areas. We're proposing to maintain the tree options, as well as add another one, essentially to provide more flexibility and also maintain status quo, bringing over all of the existing parking lots so that if they're already in conformance with the code, they don't need to change to something else. And overall, we think that these changes or proposed changes will just add a better interaction with the parking areas in the city. So the proposed changes to Chapter 37 are shown on the screen. I've left the red line version on there in case we need to go back and discuss any of the changes, but simply put, we are just referring this code to Chapter 40, making consistency, that way we don't have a redundancy in our code. So if we need to go back and make changes to 40 in the future, this code in 37 will already be pointing to that code section. So to peel back the curtain of why we are proposing more flexibility, the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan lays out different goals and visions to achieve the community's vision of reaching carbon neutrality by 2040. A few of those goals include expanding local renewable energy development and storage, and creating a cooler city with more urban forest and green space for people and habitat. Again, with the flexibility, we think that both of these goals can be accomplished at the same time. We believe that they're not mutually exclusive. And with that, this is but a small change, an incremental change as we start to comply and fully comply with the CAP goals and visions that's set out by the community. This code, in essence, the flexibility of shade, is new to Davis. It's a new proposal that has been thought of in the past and is finally being brought forward to allow the flexibility. I know I keep harping on flexibility, but this is really the essence of the code. The code that is proposed may not be perfect, but that's why we're here tonight, because we value your input before we end up proposing it to the City Council. We think that the Commission will have some very good feedback and input on the code we have tonight, and we seek that, and we want you to provide that feedback, whether it's on the percent coverage of trees or solar panels or carports, or whether it's just clarifying what landscaping is, whether it's just ground cover or trees, or if we missed anything, please provide us with feedback so we can provide a robust and hopefully ironclad recommendation to the City Council. And so that's the conclusion of my presentation. I hope for a pretty good discussion tonight, and I'll be taking notes to put forth in the staff report to the City Council. I'm also here for any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Thomas. So I'll open up to commissioners for an opportunity for clarifying questions. So if you've got any questions on the presentation or on the actual language, kind of like trying to keep this a little bit narrow in that clarification role, and then we'll have a more robust discussion down the road. Yes, Jim.
So various commissions have been urging revision of Chapter 37 for many years, and so I'm delighted to see some progress being made on that. And I hope that we see further progress on other aspects of it. But in the meantime, I found some contradictions and inconsistencies in the material that you sent us, so I'm curious for some clarification. And there's at least two different domains where there's contradictions. I'll start first with the three options that you're suggesting, and the third option. On page 1, under project description, you say 50% of the paved parking area. On page 2, under the proposed changes in in 40, you say no less than 30% of the parking spaces. And then in appendix 2, you again refer to 30% of parking spaces. So I'm curious what it is that you're actually proposing.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. I apologize for any confusion that must have caused. The 30% is what staff originally brought to the Planning Commission. It was the original code proposal, amendment proposal. The Planning Commission recommended to the City Council that we change that 30% to 50% coverage of existing or proposed shade structures. Staff is likely to bring forward that recommendation and agree with the Planning Commission that 50% is a good number to bring forward. And so that's going to be our likely recommendation to the council, is that 50% number rather than that 30%.
50% of what? Because in some places you refer to the paved parking area, and in other places you refer to paved parking spaces, and those are different.
Yes, I think the intention of the code was for the parking spaces rather than paved parking area.
Okay, so that'll be something we return to. The second and lesser inconsistency, if you will, has to do with landscaping. And on page 1 and in appendix 2, you actually refer to 10% landscaping, whereas on page 2, under the proposed changes, you don't mention landscaping. So I'm assuming that landscaping, this proposal for landscaping is what you're actually putting forward?
Yes, yeah, the landscaping is a part of chapter 40.
Right.
I think the intention of what we wanted feedback on were the three options, but, you know, input on the 10% landscaping and you know, what landscaping is, you know, we would welcome the feedback on that.
Okay, then just one final very minor clarification. If a developer chooses the third option, is it correct that they could end up with the project with no trees whatsoever?
So there will be that minimum requirement of landscaping.
Yeah, but that could be grass, it could be flowers, so it could be that they would have no trees at all.
They would still have the space, you know, within the perimeter, the planter spaces on the edges and all frontages. That would be landscaping and with trees. If you find it that you want to add some more specificity within that language, saying landscaping with trees, you know, complying with the climate-ready tree list, you know, we'd be happy to take that. Right?
Just to be sure we're clarifying here, I mean, you certainly lay out the space requirements for landscaping, but you don't say what kind of landscaping, and so it could be just shrubbery or grass. It'd be possible to have no trees.
Landscaping will be required.
Yeah.
And if you want more specificity around what kind of landscaping, we would be happy to take that.
I take that as an answer that yes, it would be possible to have no trees.
If someone proposes that, I think in the code in which it is written, there may be a case, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for starting us off. Any other commissioners have clarifying questions they want to go to? Popcorn, Jordan, I see you.
Yeah, I just got a quick one. So when is this scheduled to go to council?
It's a very good question. Schedule permitting, I think we were going to take this sometime in October, late October. Thank you.
I had a question about the thought behind the 50%. It's better, it's larger number than 30%, but in terms of what the city might really need for climate and adaptation, do we know, is there some sort of idea around why that particular percentage is what we're going for? And then there's a thought that maybe some spaces might require more than 50% given where they might be in the city. So I'm just thinking about how that number was arrived and also how adjustable that number could be depending on new information about what the city might need in the future.
Yeah, good question. The 30%, the original proposal was more towards the below 50%, thinking more in terms of just feasibility of actually getting solar panels, because it is a significant investment, especially if you're retrofitting an existing parking lot. The 50% was, the recommendation from the Planning Commission, and I think that basis was to just keep consistency through the shading coverage. It's easy just to, have the shading plan, practically speaking, and review for 50% rather than trying to remember all of the different codes. So that's the pretty simple explanation of how these numbers came about. In terms of flexibility and regarding needs, I think that if in the future more solar is needed or less, depending on how much we're getting, I think that's a great question or a great conversation to have in the future. I think it would, we would recommend just setting the baseline somewhere and seeing how much we get. That would be our recommendation.
If one of your objectives was flexibility, in that very first sentence under urban heat island effect number 1, one or a combination of the following, could it just be a combination of the following?
Correct, yeah. So part of the consistency of the 50% is that you could have half of a parking lot covered in solar and another, quarter doing the 50% and another quarter the design standards. I think at that point, staff would work with the developer to kind of come up with a more consistent plan. But in theory, you could have like a half and half.
And I would think that would be, the ideal in flexibility, and then that the word one would need to come out.
Oh, yeah. Well, one or a combination of a few.
But that gets to Jim's point, I believe, that you could just pick solar panel.
So the idea of the landscaping requirement is for the perimeter of the project. That regardless of if you choose to do solar, the 50% solar shade structures, you still have a requirement to, put landscaping along the perimeter of the project in the designated planter strips.
Thank you, folks. And can I ask, for that landscaping requirement, that 10%, how was that percentage decided upon?
I think that was a carryover from either previous code or a carryover from those development standards from other municipalities. Seeing that the 2x2 recommended 20%, we would, like to hear a recommendation or anything if the commission chooses to change that number.
Great, thank you. Sorry, one more question. I haven't lost it yet. Do you or any of the commissioners happen to remember what the shade coverage target is in the urban forest management plan?
Might be 46 or some number like that.
I can, as we're discussing here, I can look it up real quick.
Thank you. I
You told us there was going to be a pop quiz.
I know, right? Yeah, we're really grilling you all, and Thomas, you're doing great answering all these questions off the cuff. Well, thank you so much, commissioners, for those clarifying questions. Really, really helped my understanding too. Oh, sorry, do we have one more? I'm so sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought of one more. Number 2, you say one well for every 5 parking stalls. Is that each car, or like if you've got 2 that face each other, does that count? Like, what is a stall? Is it just one car, or if they touch, is that one?
It's one stall, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, one space.
One car's worth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that. Great, all right, and thanks for keeping the questions pointed to that clarifying piece. We'll have a larger discussion, I'm sure, after our opportunity for public comment. So I'll open up the public comment period on this. If any members of the public would like to approach the dais, introduce themselves, and feel free to commence your public comments when you're ready.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is John Johnston. I'm a past chair of the Natural Resources Commission. I was the chair of the 2x2 subcommittee on this issue. I'm happy to see that this issue has been brought to you. When it came to Planning Commission last June, it elicited a lot of concern amongst my colleagues about whether this commission had been kind of bypassed on an issue that really should be part of your agenda. Let me make 3 short comments here. One on the percentages. As I noted in the comments that I wrote back to you, we really don't know 50%, the basis of the 50%, except that it's been used forever and it's used by a lot of people. And I don't know if there's any strong arguments against increasing the 50%, except maybe there's probably some feasibility, practicality issues of moving cars around trees. But other than that, we don't know of a reason to stick with the 50%. With regards to solar 50, whether solar should be 50 or 30 or trees should be 50 or whatever, I think it's the total is really the issue. What's the total shade that should be covered, that should be provided? And that could be by solar, 10% by solar, 40% by trees, or vice versa. But to have left item 3 there as 30% by solar only meant that you only got 30% shade total, and that seems much too low. With regards to landscaping, I tried to provide the context of the 2x2 comments regarding its situation that it was in. It was facing proposals that were on the table in front of council to cut down trees and build solar, and there's a lot of community pressure both ways, and they were trying to thread a needle there. The 20% was not necessarily meant to be the landscaping. It was meant to be that if you did cut down the trees in a parking lot to put in solar, that some trees remain, so that it didn't look like an industrial landscape. And so it's not meant to be landscaping in the sense that you're talking about the 10% that could be trees or bushes or whatever. But I did try to convey the sense that they wanted to have some perimeter softening of what otherwise might look like an industrial setting, especially if you're out in a neighborhood. 2 more real quick things, if you don't mind. No, maybe just one more really quick thing. When I was a kid, I played baseball, and my coaches would always talk about swinging through the ball, and in golf, you always hear the guys talking about following through. This is a really great thing. This is a really, tonight's discussion is only one part of the total process. I started working on this in 2017, and we made our first presentation to NRC in 2018, our first report. And even from the very beginning, Tree Davis and other entities would tell you that the issue is not so much the percentages, but it's the care of the trees afterwards. They plant the trees, they cover them with pavement, they put little concrete dikes around them so the water can't get to them, they don't take care of them, they don't mature, they don't grow, you don't get the shade, and that has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. So tonight I'm told, let me finish up here, that you're going to be getting some procedures on how to pick up topics in the future. I would hope that you might pick up a topic that would ask the city, the urban forester to come back and explain the specifications and the details of planting and caring for trees and the accountability issues when a owner doesn't take care of their trees later on. Thank you very much.
All right, see no more public comment, I'll close that public comment period. Thank you very much, John, for your comments. All right, so now let's return and kind of a broader conversation on this topic in light of those comments. Let me start on the right side here. Jordan, would you like to kick off the conversation for us today?
Yeah, sure. I'll like to have a little bit more to say as we open up our discussion here. I think, you know, the planning commission's feedback, I think is a good place to start for sure. I like that 50% number, a whole lot more than that 30% number for solar. And I do have questions about the interpretations of some combination thereof, right? If people are gonna, developers are gonna pick a hodgepodge of these three options, what does that look like in practice to do those calculations? And kind of what's that standard we're getting to? I also agree with our former colleague John that the end result of total coverage is probably as relevant as the methods by which you get there in terms of individual components of that shade coverage. So I think those are both relevant here. And I also appreciate, Jim, you calling out that, the percent of parking spaces is very different than percent of paved parking area. So I think that language is stay consistent, and I think it should be the paved parking area, not the spaces themselves, because that can be a much more constrained calculation, depending on how your parking lot is built. So I think all of those are really relevant for council to consider in thinking through this update. And then kind of getting back to that discussion of, if we're mandating these landscaping frontage strips and we have dimensions for them and all of that. As we were talking, I pulled up chapter 40 and just used a little search feature. There's a lot of talk about landscaping for different zoning classifications. There is not one definition for landscaping in chapter 40 right now. So, I think that might be something to think about in doing the zoning code update is if that needs a definition in chapter 40, if it's going to be part of that sort of, hey, we're still having to do landscaping, so it's okay if the coverage of your trees or solar panels is a little bit less. I think that should be more clearly defined, and if the expectation and the intent is that there's trees in those landscaping strips, that might need to be more explicitly stated in the language of the code right now that we're seeing here. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Dan?
Yes, I think the only thing that I would want to add, and it sort of echoes what the public comment was made about, the health and longevity of the tree is what we're really after. The trees is what we're really after to get shade from the trees. And so there's nothing in this language about best practices for the optimal size of that tree well. And there has been other indications and suggestions that that tree well should be larger for the health and survival of the tree. And in addition, there's nothing about irrigation. And I don't know if irrigation is mentioned in some other aspect of this document, but I think making sure that the parking lot and the tree wells are irrigated, particularly for summer irrigation, is imperative for the success of any of the landscape, particularly the trees.
Thank you, Ann. Go on.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lot that I don't know about best practices when it comes to, taking care of the climate and adaptation of our city. And I think that information changes all the time as we get a better sense of what our city needs. And I think it would be nice to have some language where we want to have the flexibility to change maybe the landscaping or change the infrastructure to take into account, potentially more drought or more other situations that might require some differences in the infrastructure. I don't know how I would go about that language, but I'm just thinking that 50% may not be enough in some cases, or some combinations of these things just might not be sufficient. in some, and it could be some parking lots where it's totally fine, and other ones that it's not, you know, depending on how the rest of the town fits together. So that's kind of my thoughts and feelings. I don't know how to make it more tangible or specific, but that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you, Alon. Jim?
Yeah, I'll just preface it by noting that I was on the tree commission for something like 8 years before the merger here, so I kind of just with some background. In terms of parking lots, you know, there's various considerations. I mean, you know, because I'm sure that the developer is worried about finances and so on. But I think from our perspective, the main considerations are the heat island and aesthetics. And I'll sort of refer first of all to the heat island. You know, these parking lots, when you drive around, they're extremely hot. I mean, you know, we have to be very serious about the heat island thing. And so I think that we want to be a little bit more explicit about the minimum requirements that we want. I think that at a preliminary statement before the options of 1, 2, or 3, there should be a statement saying that our goal is to have at least 50% shading over the paved parking area. So that any of these 3 options or combination has to accomplish at least 50% shading over the, and I won't say the parking spaces, it's the whole paved parking lot, because that's what's the source of the heat island thing. In terms of aesthetics, we need to be a little bit, I know there has to be some flexibility. There's places where trees might not be appropriate and so on. But in terms of this landscaping, I would want to, again, to say at least 10% landscaping. And I would like to see a general statement saying that the preference is for some trees, and I won't specify how many, and that if there's an absence of trees, that has to be justified to the staff. But that to state that there is some preference, if it's at all possible, to have trees. And again, that's partly heat island, but it's also aesthetics. And then finally, I'll just reinforce what some people have been saying. The tree commission, for a long time, in trying to work on revising Chapter 37, one of our main concerns was compliance, that developers didn't comply and there was no enforcement and so on. I think that we need to have, you know, some awareness and some explicit statement, hopefully here in this revision, that the trees not only have to be properly planted with the right soil and irrigation, but that there has to be some enforcement mechanism. And one of the mechanisms that we talked about in the tree commission was having the developer deposit a financial bond that could be drawn upon if after 15 years things hadn't succeeded. So that the developer has a financial stake in maintaining the trees and so on, otherwise they would lose this bond. And that would provide the financing if there is a failure to rectify that. So those are just ideas, and I don't know exactly how that could be incorporated here and so on, but those are just some thoughts that I've had.
Thank you, Jim. Jesse?
Coming at the end, my thoughts were already pretty well covered, but I think the big thing would be the at least giving that flexibility so that the intent of the regulation is there. At least 50% more is even better. And the emphasis on the entire paved area versus just the parking spaces, because the drivable areas are a large portion of parking lots. So those are immune from the calculation. I think we're losing out on a lot of coverage there.
Thank you.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
I neglected to state, support for what the planning commission recommended, and part of that was crossing out the notion of what the solar energy had to be used for. It seemed to me that it's just as useful if it's used for something else or if it's used for in the development, but just putting it on the grid is what we want.
Thanks, all. I guess maybe I wasn't done with my clarifying questions too. Something that has come up a lot is that enforcement piece, and that's something I'm a little bit ignorant of. So these being kind of development standards, what type of enforcement occurred? I realize that there would be like plan checks and potentially checks after it's installed to make sure that it matches the plan. Is there an enforcement mechanism either in the code or otherwise to ensure that over time these developments are meeting the standard?
So you're correct. So through the planning process, right, there are checks to make sure that what was in the plans, what was approved by either council or planning commission, council, and or administratively within the planning department, that what they said they were going to plant, they planted, and they planted properly. So there are those checks. As far as ongoing, that's been, as is mentioned, it's been a topic for years. Current code is very challenging in how we would enforce it. It refers either back to administrative codes, which are not significant to start, and or criminal code, which is a much different path. And then quite frankly, staff does not have the workload availability to provide enforcement to a large degree. So from a prioritization, that just has not been allocated to staff, or I have not encouraged staff to look at enforcement as a high priority given the other challenges that exist within the program. That being said, in the recent discussion with council, which is not completed, we've initiated that, but we're coming back at some point. Enforcement, penalties, fees, all of those, there was a clear message from council that is something they want to look at in more depth. So there will be some engaged conversation with council moving forward. I suspect once we have that and we get some direction from council, that we would be back with this commission to discuss those topics.
Excellent. Thank you, Stan. I guess so. My next thought here is one. I do want to praise you all for incorporating into your slides the link to the climate action adaptation plan. I am typically also a big fan of offering options in situations like this, and I think you've done a really good job of balancing those somewhat opposing goals in the cap of both renewable energy generation and reducing the heat island effect. And I think some of the structure here of offering different avenues to meet these standards helps get us there and helps balance those priorities. And just as a general sort of approaching at coming to this commission, putting this information in terms of a climate action plan, I just found super helpful. So thank you so much for that. The other piece I'm also considering is the environmental justice lens that we're putting onto a lot of these issues. And I actually think that the paved parking area, which a number of the commissioners have talked to, kind of gets at that. When I think about the difference between the stalls or the paved parking area and navigating those, the seas and parking lots that you see out there, or thinking about what parts of the parking lot are accessible to different members of the community who might have mobility challenges. I think it would be really important to, I think I agree with the rest of my commissioners here, that focusing on paved parking area as opposed to stalls might help us get there a little bit. I'd be interested to, as commissioners think about this too, if they see any other kind of environmental justice frameworks here as well. I think the other area of alignment I see too is a lot of the existing parking lots are in multifamily residential areas, and so that community maybe is then particularly affected by the heat island effect that you get from parking lots that don't meet these standards. So, and I guess Stan, you're kind of comment gets to that in some ways. These are forward-looking standards. When existing, I guess but they will not, there's no scenarios where these forward-looking standards would be applied to an existing parking lot. For instance, if that parking lot was being remodeled or something, would these standards then be put onto that parking lot, or is it strictly for new builds?
Yeah, they would, so this would apply to remodels as well. So if someone came in and wanted to redo their parking lot, or for instance, put in shade or put in solar panels, they would have to adhere to these requirements once they're adopted. So it would, in effect, over time, hit those. The other aspect is once we do have that discussion around enforcement, nothing precludes us from looking at existing and saying, you have some improvements to make, and we now have the tools and or the resources to, enforce those, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think that sums my thoughts here. Jim, I'll pass back to you, but just if I can, for just one moment, kind of structure the remainder of this conversation. So this is an action item before us, and so for those action items, staff is seeking our feedback, which we'll give them through, motions. Those can be either particular edits to text that we see. It could be, or we could say, the Environmental Justice Commission emphasizes a particular part or a particular outcome, or asks staff to make different changes, council to consider something. So I'd like to start, as we, as we continue this conversation, start moving towards putting together some of those motions. Can be multiple motions, can be one single huge omnibus motion, but I prefer smaller motions. Makes it a little easier, but just keeping that in mind. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm sorry, because I was just about to say something totally unrelated to that, but I agree with you, we should get to that. But in the meantime, I'm concerned, I'm assuming that part of this notion of trying to have the flexibility is to try and be amenable to the developers and so on. And so I just wanted to make a mention of the experience that the Tree Commission had during the discussion of the DISC 2 project, where the Ramos group were quite happy to meet with us. We had a subcommittee that met with them, and we worked out landscaping plans and so on, and they approved. They had no complaint about 50% in the parking areas, 80% in walkways and places where people congregate, 30% next to the buildings. They were very amenable to working with us. So I'm not, don't get too overly concerned about how developers will react to these requirements. You might find that developers are quite happy, particularly with the aesthetic aspects, because that draws people in.
Thank you for that perspective, Jim. Stan?
So back to the question of the management plan goal for canopy cover. So there's no specific number. It was no net loss was the overarching goal. However, it did indicate there is an objective in there to maybe a little more focal canopy cover. When you talk about environmental justice, making sure that if there's neighborhoods that need to be enhanced, to enhance that, it's more of a local goal that we would look at, not the overall. The number that Anna was referring to, I think, was where we're at today based on the inventory. So basically that would be the floor that we would see. So just to answer that.
Thank you. It was an open notes quiz, so I really appreciate you going back and looking that up. Jordan, do you look like you had a thought there?
Yeah, and I don't want to get us too far down a rabbit hole here with something that came up a minute ago. Gave me another maybe clarifying question and another couple comments. So I'm hearing that this would be retroactive, so to speak. Somebody came in with a proposal to redevelop their parking lot or to do some work on their existing facility, they would be held to this standard in the future. That's correct. So what's the trigger that would make this this standard relevant in terms of a redevelopment proposal on an existing parking lot? Is that just any building permit?
If I'm understanding it correctly, your question, it's not necessarily retroactive. So the reason for option one of the rationale between leaving option one in the list of options is so that any compliant parking spaces now does not turn into what we call legal non-conforming and then force them to change to something else. So if I'm going in the right direction, there's no need for somebody upon a building permit to do one thing or another. It's more of, the landowner or developer may choose of the slew of options, which one they would like to comply with, or, as proposed, the combination.
So if I'm
Answer your
hearing,
question.
I think we're going in the right direction.
Okay.
So if I'm hearing that correctly, if a property is currently non-compliant, there's no enforcement mechanism, and they come in to do some modification to their parking lot, but theoretically they were going to achieve that 50% shade coverage when it was developed, are they just gonna kind of sneak right by?
So I think the goal would be more compliance.
Sure.
And we would have that conversation, make that comment if they were proposing changes to the parking area or paved area, whatever we end up approving. I think that's the ultimate goal. So in the event the parking area isn't fully compliant with the 50% after the 15 years, without lack of a true enforcement mechanism, it's more of a reminder and a nudge and saying, we have new code, here are different options, please think about this. But especially with new development, we will strive to get compliance in different methods.
I would just add that depending on where we are in the process of updating Chapter 37 towards enforcement, penalties, fees like that, that would be something we would certainly share with an applicant or a developer, and certainly caution them that if they were tearing things up and looking at things now, it might behoove them to make those changes and move in that direction to comply with Chapter 40 in advance of enforcement and penalties going into effect, because at that point, depending on the direction from council, we might be following up with all of the property owners and property management companies that are not and have not been maintaining their parking lot shade for however many years. So that's definitely part of the conversation that we would have. Whether that's like a minor improvement, like a design review, substantial compliance, administrative review by planning staff, or whether it's just something even more minor than that there might be a building permit or a tenant improvement associated with that, but there might not necessarily be like a formal entitlement. Wouldn't probably rise to the level of a full administrative design review or a design review that would go to planning commission, but we would certainly take those opportunities in the interim to have those conversations with property owners.
Yeah, this is helpful, because I do think we shouldn't think of this only in the sense of new development. I think this is going to be relevant for folks who want to come in and make changes to an existing property. And that leads me to one other question that I kind of came to as we were having this discussion and kind of reviewing the staff report here. So I noticed that there's language in there that this is triggered either upon issuance of the entitlement for the development or a building permit. And so I also saw that there's language that the community development director can sort of, in my read, unilaterally say, no, you got to do something different on your landscaping plan. And so I just wonder if there's enough clarity as written right now that if you're going through a ministerial permitting process, what is the community development director's ability to say, no, you got to do something different or else we'll approve this, and does that change it to a discretionary review process? And where do those lines cross a little bit? And I might be getting too deep into the weeds here, but it's a question I think I'd have as a developer or a landowner or an owner if I were wanting to consider redeveloping my property.
I think that's a very good question. I think that may be, sorry, as I reread staff report, I think that might be, an addition that you can make to the language that, as it reads right now, it does require a discretionary permit, and some ministerial processes preclude that, in our objective design standards. I'm not sure if we have parking requirements in there, I actually can't remember. But it could be part of, the recommendation that you give us, and, it's possible that we have further recommendations to add that to the objective design standards, which, now that I think about it, any ministerial project will have to follow our objective design standards. So unless these standards are in the objective design standards, then they may not have to comply with these standards. So it's a very good point, but it could be be a recommendation from the commission, if you will choose to do so, to recommend taking a look at our objective design standards and our next omnibus, and bringing it to the planning commission for their thoughts as well.
Thank you. I would like to include that in the motion as we move forward here. And I'll try to sketch that out myself, Jake, and I'll leave them all on you to craft here.
Yeah, well, Jordan, let's take them one by one. It's been a long day, so I don't know if I can put them all together. Do you think you can take a crack at crafting a motion with that in mind? Do you want a minute to chew on that a little bit before we do?
I'm hoping it can be relatively simple and say I would move that we encourage staff to ensure that any modifications as proposed here to chapter 37 and 48 are in alignment with the objective design standards, or otherwise revisit the objective design standards to make that the case. I'll probably bundle that at the very end, but something along those lines.
All right, perfect. Would anyone like to second that motion?
Sure, I'll second that.
Thank you, Jim. And if anyone would like to offer, comments or friendly amendments or anything at this point too, you do have an opportunity. And otherwise, all those in favor for this motion, I'm not going to restate it because it's just stated very clearly, can raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that one carries unanimous. All right, thank you. Great catch, Jordan. I've also got in mind a potential motion around that paved parking area that we've been talking about a little bit, but I'm wondering if anyone has an idea in their head already about what a motion about that paved parking area could look like. I can try to take a stab at it. I was worried that no one else had that formed already. So I think same kind of lines. I think encouraging staff to use paved parking area as the sole metric to judge shade coverage throughout the standard in lieu of the parking space metric, or per parking space metric. I guess that's my motion. John?
Do you want to try and keep this simple, or could we add to that the language be at least 50% shade?
I was thinking we could keep it, do the 50, discuss the 50% separately, if you don't mind. But if you'd like to offer it as a friendly amendment, we can.
That's fine.
I like the one-by-one approach.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know if I got a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jordan. And all those in favor, can raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Thank you. That one carries unanimously as well. And Jim, do you want to talk us through your thoughts on the percentages?
Yeah. In the preamble to this, there should be a statement that the goal is at least 50% shade coverage of the entire paved parking area. And then in the option 3, it would specifically say at least 50% of the paved parking area covered.
Jim, if I can, I don't know if there's a clarifying question. I have been thinking about the same thing. I was wondering about option 2 here, and how that would compare if option 2 was taken. Does that lead us to 50%?
That's why I wanted in the preamble saying that whatever the option was, it has to cover at least 50% of the paved parking area.
Thank you. Any thoughts, seconds from the amendment?
I guess I'll go back to my remove the one, so that it can so that we can't just have it be the solar shade. The trees have to be explicitly remarked that has to be included. And we don't really see that if they skip option 1.
So you're saying it would have to be some combination?
I would propose we take that up as a separate motion.
That sounds good. So the motion remains, as Jim stated, in the preamble to the options, establishing a 50% shade coverage,
At least.
at least 50% shade coverage.
At least 50% shade cover of the paved parking area.
So, to follow up on, I forgot your name, and perspective, were you saying that you would like some percentage of that 50% to be trees?
Right, I mean, by my read of this, if people are able to pick, one, two, or, the options, they could opt to just have solar panels. And I think that is not the message we want to send. And I think that's not what the citizens want. I think it needs to be a combination, because I think trees provide a different kind of shade. I mean, yes, it's shade, but it's a different kind of shade, and it's, for the health of the, physical and mental health of the community. So I think we're doing a disservice to the community if we allow it to go with that, pick one option.
Also, I guess I have a question for you, Anne. What about the landscaping perimeter? If trees were there, could that work potentially?
I mean, potentially, but that's a pretty narrow area, and they may be, the ornamental tree that looks nice, that has that buffer, so to make the place look attractive, but yet is not producing the kind of shade canopy that I think we are trying to achieve, and what the city is striving for in the urban forest management plan. We want to grow our shade canopy, and parking lots are a perfect opportunity to do that, and we have this window of opportunity to get this language right.
Do we have a second for Jim's motion yet?
Not yet.
I would like to second Jim's motion and then come back to this discussion.
Thank you. So I guess with that second then, and with no objections over adding Anne, your topic into this, then we can move to voting on Jim's motion of establishing at least 50% shade cover of paved parking area in the preamble to this. All those in favor can raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that's unanimous as well.
The motion also included adjusting number 3 to be consistent.
Agreed.
So we'll note,
Thank you.
we'll note that.
So I have a couple of thoughts on the combination or some combination thereof language, but Anne or Alana, do you want to present that as a motion or do you want to discuss it a little bit more first?
I think more discussion should be had potentially. I think one of my questions, and this again goes to I just don't know how many trees or what percentage of trees should be there in terms of theories on climate adaptation. I kind of want a more evidence-based understanding of what these percentages should look like. I just don't have that at my disposal right now. And I don't necessarily want to just arbitrarily propose percentages yet, but I do have a feeling that tree coverage is important, and having the possibility for just solar panel coverage may not be sufficient, but I don't know how to better understand what to propose from there.
Yeah, well, I'll sort of add to that if you just say combination, it could be 99% of number 3. And so there might be one tree located in the corner or something. So unless we can do something further, but the more we do along these lines, then it reduces the flexibility and so on, and I worry about that. An alternative is to hope and trust that the staff in approving anything takes some effort here at encouraging trees or something. But I'm inclined myself to maintain this flexibility.
That was my worry as well. I think if we want to make sure that we are getting some sort of tree coverage, regardless of what they pick out of these options, the area to focus would be on that 10%. And, you know, advising tree requirements there. And maybe around the types of trees, like you said, to avoid the ornamental kind that aren't in line with our goals. But in hopes to not reduce the flexibility of the parking coverage, maybe that should be where we focus.
I have a thought, potentially as a corollary to the possibility of just having, in the case that you choose 50% coverage from just solar panels, then the landscaping must have trees that provide coverage to offset that maybe as an alternative language.
So I'm in agreement that maybe the landscaping provision is the place to address that, and then pretty strongly, I guess in disagreement technically, Ann, but that, I think we should leave developers or landowners who want to redevelop their property and make it better, the ability to do that 50% solar without needing to make space for trees in their parking area, especially knowing that I'm just thinking of maybe these are edge cases, maybe these are common cases, right? Somebody who wants to add solar to their parking lot to defray their energy costs for their business operations, right? That can be a pretty slim margin of how long that might pay for itself or what it looks like for your business at that point. And so if they need to hit that, a lot of solar panels and a few trees to do that, I would much rather see them put in the solar panels and say, well, I guess I'm not doing the project because I can't make it pencil economically in there because I gotta put in these trees. I think looking at that landscaping area is the place to try to ensure there's some of that tree coverage on new developments in some of these properties without tying the hands of, and again, I'm really thinking of existing development here that want to come in and do some renewables and make things better, but maybe can't hit that because of. The other thing I'll just add, when you're redeveloping a parking lot, it's not as simple as stripe it up and throw some trees down and you're good to go. There's ADA accessibility, there's circulation, there's fire truck turnarounds. There's all sorts of contingencies there that your developer and designer is going to think about that we may not have on our minds here as we're thinking about trees. So I would really encourage us to look at that landscaping provision as opposed to the, trying to say you can't just do solar panels to hit the shade coverage in your parking area.
Thank you, Jordan. I agree with that logic and reasoning there.
I didn't want to flash everything.
And so I think the thing that I would add here that might make this a little bit, maybe it's trickier, maybe it's not, but I think the beginning of the motion in my mind is to request that staff add a definition to chapter 40 here to define landscaping, and maybe there's a sub-definition. I think that the trickiest part for staff here is going to be, how do we enforce this in areas where, to this commission's thoughts, hey, you want to do a lot of solar panels, okay, put trees in your landscaping strips. That doesn't also fundamentally change that for other developments that may not be grappling with that issue. So I think it's the language and how we tell people to do this is going to be very difficult to come up with, and maybe it's something we just ask staff to go take a look back at. But I think it might be difficult to craft something without getting really into the weeds on the code here, which I'm not super inclined to do at this hour in this discussion.
Yeah, I concur with that approach of giving kind of general kind of direction here of that we think the landscaping, we think the landscaping maybe needs a definition, and a definition that does something, and giving staff the ability to kind of navigate that. We think this definition should do kind of X, Y, and Z. We don't quite know how to do that, but we'll leave it to the experts. Does anyone want to?
I'll take a stab at something.
Thank you.
So along those lines, I think my motion might be request that staff consider adding a definition of landscaping to chapter 40, and within that definition, draft it to encourage shade trees as a key component of landscaping and not just ornamental trees.
Maybe the terms, to the extent possible,
Sure.
would be useful there.
Yeah, to the extent possible, absolutely. Thank you.
I'll second that motion. Any friendly amendments or discussion on that?
I have a thought. We have one metric here, which is total paved parking area. And then there's another metric possible, which is total, including the landscaping zoning around it. What would that be called, the landscaping plus the paved parking area? Is there a term for that? Just a lot?
I think if you include all of, like, the perimeter landscaping and the paved area, I think we would just call that just site developments, site improvements.
So the site improvement area. Yeah, so right now, you have a site improvement area and 10% of the area needs to be landscaping. Is that what this saying? Okay. And which means if 10% is landscaping, 90% could be paved parking lot area. Is that?
Plus the building and other.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so what I'm kind of thinking about right now is having tree coverage criteria for the whole property development site, and some of that tree for shade, and some of that can be covered within that landscaping area, and some of it can be covered in the parking lot spaces. But having kind of this sense of always having tree coverage, at least a certain percentage of it in the site, and then having a subcategory for how much should be in the paved parking lot area.
Well, so if I'm interpreting the code right now correctly, we're talking about a couple different standards here, and I'm hoping the planning staff can help me with this. So there's a minimum of 10% of the entire site must be landscaped outside of the building envelope, right? So that's 10% of whatever square footage is has to be landscaped. And we also have tree planters required along the frontages, correct? And that can be captured within that 10%. Okay. Let me make sure I'm reading that right. So, to my mind, there's some obligations already to do frontage landscaping and a minimum percentage of landscaping. So I think if we can encourage shade trees within that space, we might be getting what we're after in this conversation. I don't know if that's correct or not. Hold on, I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, so I think the language here around landscaping just doesn't include specific shade coverage from trees. And so if we added that somewhere in there so that the development site always has some percentage of shade coverage from trees, some of which could be placed in the landscaping, then at least we'll know that that's there, and to Anne's point. And so if they choose the option of having all solar panels for that 50% shade coverage over the paved parking lot area, then they would still need to provide some shade coverage in the landscaping portion of it. So it sounds like that could be a way of always offering an opportunity for shade from trees, while also allowing for 50% solar panel coverage in the parking lots.
So I think the 2x2 committee recommendation from a couple years ago that John sent us actually has a minimum target of 20% tree shading on the property, regardless of how you're achieving your parking lot shade and that sort of thing. Do we want to, either in this motion or a separate motion, encourage staff to consider integrating that recommendation from the 2x2? Because that's a number they came up with and seemed to put some time into. I know John and I think folks from the tree commission worked quite a bit on that. I don't know if Ann or Jim, you have any recollection of that?
Yeah, I'm open to more discussion on
I think we're impinging then on what these options are, because then that would require changing option 3 or something. I'm inclined, and I'm open to this, but I'm inclined to leave the options the way they are and just focus on this landscaping and leave it pretty much the way it is, except to add the phrase that 10% should include some shade trees to the extent possible. And leave it, I mean, because, different locations are going to have different requirements, so we have to leave it somewhat vague. So I'm just saying some trees to the extent possible without being more specific. But at least it indicates to the staff what our preferences are and what sorts of things they'll approve and not approve.
Good point.
I mean, I know that this is sort of a revolutionary idea, but I think we have to trust the staff a little bit.
So going back to the motion that I don't believe was seconded yet, you, in essence, asking for recommending staff consider a definition for landscaping, which I think could encapsulate what I'm hearing from most of the commission, in that if you define landscaping as to include trees, then I think you're getting at the goals that we're hearing across the board. So I think the motion itself might, unless you want to clarify that again with a different motion, the motion that has not been seconded, I think, might cover what you're talking through.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jim. All right, so with that in mind, all those in favor of Jordan's motion, raise your hand and say aye. Aye? And that will be unanimous. Thank you, Stan. All right, folks, so we've hit a few things. We've hit, including touching on objective design standards, using a parking area as a metric, establishing at least 50% shade coverage regardless of the option chosen, adding that definition of landscaping with the emphasis on increasing shade trees throughout the property. That sounds about it. So I think with that, then we'll close this item. Thank you all so much for that spirited discussion, commissioners and staff. Thanks for picking this up. From the Natural Resource Commission, we heard about this like every other meeting for all the years I was on that commission. So really excited to be seeing this before us today. Thank you. And with that, we're at about 7:20, and we've got one more item on the regular agenda here. That's the commission-initiated task process. Stan, I'll give you a couple moments, or how long you need to get transferred over, and we can get going on this one.
Yep, so I don't have a presentation. I do have the attachment that was included in your packet up, which is in essence outlining the process. We'll walk through it just real quickly, but in a nutshell, if you have an item that's not within that's an action-oriented item, and there are examples of that in there, but if there are action-oriented items that the commission or a commissioner would like to discuss, this document outlines the process by which council has determined how that action item would be thought through. So in a nutshell, we would, during long range, commissioners could bring up ideas if it involved again, action item where you're asking potentially for staff resources, or you're potentially council would make a determination of resources, those types of actions. You could propose that. The commission as a whole could consider that if they wanted to put that in front of council as an item that they would that the commission would like, that council would like the commission to entertain. And then there's a template also of a staff report. If it's a consensus, it doesn't have to be unanimous. If a consensus of the commission would like that to go to council, I in essence would prepare a staff report as outlined in attachment 2, I believe it is. And demonstrating what you'd want council to consider, what are the benefits, how would that benefit either our goals or the community, and then I would provide staff analysis whether or not we agree, and then the council would then weigh in on that and say thumbs up, thumbs down, or maybe there's some tweaks to this, and maybe we'd want to go through that in a little more detail. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell. Council did approve this as part of the commission consolidation and revamp. So I believe this process was brought before other commissions prior to the consolidation. So this commission as a body has not seen it. but you should have seen pieces of it at least in the past if you were on previous commissions. So happy to take questions with that, but it's basically as outlined by council approval, so not a lot of changes we're gonna make within that. But during long range would be when we take that up, so we would not do we would not consider something for your agenda to discuss it at a future meeting. If you have an item that is really action-oriented, we would discuss it. You could have a little brief back and forth during long range, and then you'd basically have a vote, and then I would take it from there, and then we would see where council lands with it.
So I assume that since this is sort of a new thing, that we'll work with it and see how it works. But after a time, if there are problems, then we can make suggestions for revisions and so on.
Like any documents or any policies, they're always subject to review and modification at council's direction, yes.
So thank you, and if you don't mind if I just kind of respond to that as well. Couple of things. First of all, there is, believe it or not, yet another council subcommittee made up of me and Councilmember Partita, and we are tasked with doing what you suggested, Commissioner Kramer, which is to see how this is really working. And if it's not, and if it becomes really burdensome, we're supposed to be suggesting modifications. So even though you're just hearing the idea of it all first, we're already looking at it and evaluating it and asking whether it's really, working.
It's called adaptive management.
It's program evaluation on an ongoing basis. But I did want to ask you, Stan, if I heard you correctly. So when the commissioners, if they decide they have an action-oriented item and they'd like to undertake the work, did I hear you say they needed to vote unanimously to approve that?
Not unanimous, but it needs to be a consensus of the commission.
Exactly.
Correct.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I misheard.
Thank you. And let's do, similar to our regular items of clarifying questions. So Jim, thank you. That's a great clarifying question. Let me keep going on this side. Jessica, do you have any clarifying questions on how this process would work?
No, I thought the document outlined it really well.
Alon?
I can only know until we try it. I think it sounds good on paper.
Thank you. Ann?
I agree, I think we just have to experience it and see how it goes. But thank you for putting it together.
Jordan, any clarifying questions?
A little bit. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the process correctly here, so thanks everyone for bearing with me as I might be a little dense. So Stan, if I'm hearing that right, let's say a commissioner does some research and says, hey, this is an interesting topic, I think there's something relevant the commission will want to discuss here. We bring that up during long range, have a discussion during long range and a vote during long range to ask you to present it to council for direction to pick it up as an agenda item or form a subcommittee or otherwise.
Correct, if it's an action item, so is the examples underneath, right? So there are certainly things within your commission purview that does not need to go through this process, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely understand the action items. Okay, that was all I needed, thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. And is there a built-in time frame here? So if we have an action item that's going to council, is there?
I don't know that there's a specific time frame listed, but I believe it's within the next couple of council meetings after the motion's been made or the commission meeting. So the idea is it would not wait 6 months. It would be on me to get it in front of council in a timely fashion, which I believe in the document or in the staff report was 1 to 2 meetings.
Yeah, that's what it said.
And it looks like it would go on consent for council as well, so if council was comfortable with it, they wouldn't necessarily need to pull and discuss and bring it back. If it were on consent, they were good with it, no one pulled it, it could go the next meeting, because consent can generally be pretty full on any given meeting, in my experience at least.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. That's great. And I think, as Jim said, we'll be relying on staff, and I'm sure we'll be able to kind of check in as we go. Thanks for the clarifying questions, folks. We don't have any members of the public in here today, so I won't bother opening the public comment period. And with this is just an informational item, am I remembering that?
Correct. And I did, most other commissions have seen this already. I wanted to wait till we had the new commissioners on board, so we went through it. So that's why that's why Councilmember Neville is already looking at it again, and you're seeing it for the first time.
Excellent, well, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing how this rolls out and how it affects our long-range calendar. So let's close up this item unless there's any final thoughts here from folks. And seeing none, we can close this item and move to that long-range calendar and see if we want to make Stan do a little bit of work to put something in the council. Sorry, Stan, before I start putting more on your plate, why don't you walk us through some of the upcoming items here?
So for October, the State of the Urban Forest annual report, that's one of your annual reports that staff brings forward. So Adrian and Charlie are already chatting about that. The three of us will get together and start putting that together here really quick. So that's for October. I did mention, and then November we have the term plan introduction and the CAP annual report. I will say the CAP annual report might not be for November, so as we mentioned, Sam had just got on board. And due to that, from a resource perspective, we haven't moved a whole lot of things on the CAP objectives in the past 6 months or so. So we'll play that one by ear a little bit and see what we can bring forward. I think a discussion is probably still warranted. I just think, I'm just setting the stage, you may not see a lot of forward movement on some of the actions for this last little bit of period here. So, and then not mentioned on here, but certainly I mentioned it earlier, we don't have the special meeting next week because we moved the item up tonight. But we will at some point, I don't know if it's October or November, or if we ask for a special meeting, we will be discussing the Willow Grove development with planning at some point as well. But I don't have an exact time frame for that yet.
Thank you, Stan. Yeah, Don.
I realized there was something I did not mention earlier that might relate to your schedules, not so much your long-range calendar for this commission, but I want to make sure that we remember to tell you that on October 9th at 6 p.m., we are doing a training for chairs and vice chairs, and anyone can come. You don't have to be someone who's currently a chair or vice chair, you just can come. We realize that there's a lot of new folks who are taking on that responsibility. We want them to feel really comfortable. So we're going to run through kind of how it's supposed to work and give some pointers. And I might even be one of the participants in these skits where I will play the brand new commission chair and other people can quiz me. But we're still working on the details, but I hope you all feel welcome to come to that training.
Yeah. And I'll make sure if it hasn't already, I did see an email, but I'll make sure that the commission gets an email with those details, so you have that.
I believe we did get one a week or two ago.
I think so, yeah.
Never a bad idea to get it a second time.
Absolutely. Okay.
Stan, I would just amend what comment you made, that you said you haven't made much progress on the last 6 months on CAP. We just made progress tonight.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that feedback. Noted.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Thank you, Jim. I'd also offer too for that annual report. It's when you're not making progress, where I think that's going to be okay, but perhaps a useful framing of that conversation instead could be like a look at prioritization for us. If we haven't been able to push things forward, and let's look at what are the real limitations to our staffing, and that might help make that a little bit more effective.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be the vein of the report, is looking at where we might see potential moving forward versus, we had to hit the pause button for a little bit. I think it's more, what do we see? Normally these annual reports are like, what have we achieved with a little bit of in front. I think this one will be more, here's what we look to accomplish. Here's the priorities that the council subcommittee and council have provided, from a resource perspective, because we certainly don't have the resources for every action. So I definitely think we'll kind of reset and start that conversation again. And I think by then, hopefully, Sam will be a little more up to speed on where we're at.
Good luck, Sam. One other item I wanted to talk, or I just wanted to ask you all about another thing for the October 27th meeting. That State of the Urban Forest annual report, I think that's going to be a doozy and take quite a lot of our time, but we do have a couple items on that, potential items with no set date. I think in our last meeting, Alana, you brought up some great questions about how we can better set up the folks coming to the commission with some prompting questions that we'd like them to consider. And we talked about forming a subcommittee around that. We also talked about forming a subcommittee around environmental justice and continuing that effort. So I'd be interested from commissioners if I think those items, forming that subcommission to me sounds maybe like a 20-minute item, which is probably the right level to complement that state of the urban forest. Hopefully it doesn't take us too far into the depths of the night, but I wonder if you all can help me maybe prioritize what we think might be the right one of those two different subcommittee items to slot in for that October 27th, and cross our fingers that we'd be able to get to it.
Not to upend the apple cart too much, but I also see we have urban forestry program staffing, and if that's something that's ready to happen in November, that seems like, or in October, it seems like it'd be a nice parallel with the.
I think the staffing will be part of the annual report. Yeah, so, and now what that was intended for the item, it might not fully encapsulate it, but I think the annual report will cover, where we're at from a resource perspective, what we're doing and those types of things. So I think we can probably remove that, but I can certainly make sure we address that in the annual report item.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jordan. That was kind of my implicit assumption, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay, yeah, maybe I just missed tonight. And so in terms of the subcommittees, in my mind, there's a little bit of an order of operations here that makes a lot of sense, and then maybe, that others feel differently, but I feel like if we're gonna revisit or otherwise take further the EJ framework that our former commissioners presented to us a couple months ago, I'd be inclined to do that before we put together questions and clarifications for departments on environmental justice when they bring us presentations. I feel like that would be pretty feed directly into that next subcommittee, so I'd be inclined to take that one first.
Thanks for your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. It seems like that's the proper order of operation.
Thank you. Any thoughts from this end of the table?
I agree.
I think that both are probably important, and I'm not really too partial on the order, so if that's what we want to do. I think potentially the item, the question about what sort of questions would be important for the staff reports to address. I think that could be part of the other as well in consideration, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be its own thing.
Yeah, thank you, Alana. That's a really good point. We don't necessarily need to split hairs here. So if we put that on the agenda for October 27th of forming that environmental justice subcommittee, that the way we frame that could probably touch either both the framework and then follow into that framework can then inform those questions or be the same document if that's the way they choose to go. So we'll target that for the 27th. Tell the urban forest folks they can't go on all night because we've got something else to do then that day. But I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you. Any other thoughts on the long-range calendar from folks? Anything that you're not seeing here that you'd like to make sure gets added before we go through that council process?
I don't know if this is for the long-range calendar explicitly, but maybe, Stan, this is something to talk about, not in this juncture, but I know we have the general plan introduction in November and the general plan subcommittee. Is that fully staffed in this commission at this point?
So there were a few folks that expressed interest. To my knowledge, that has not been formed yet officially, but the community development director does have the folks that were interested.
Thanks, Jordan. And I guess with that, seeing no other items or questions, I think we can close this one out and adjourn this meeting.
Yeah, I move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Jordan. All those in favor, get up and get out of here.